Hello, my dear friends. Yesterday I heard a terrific story. As soon as I heard it, I thought, I have to share this with the congregation. The story has something to do with Pesach. It took place a year ago on Pesach, on the Pesach Seder, and it was a time of the COVID pandemic, which we're still, unfortunately, we still have not emerged from that completely. But I wanted to find some type of connection to Pesach thematically, not just in terms of when it took place, but that it somehow relates directly to Pesach. And I was reminded of an article that I wrote 17 years ago. We used to publish a newsletter for the shul twice a year. Arnie Lustiger was the editor, Rosh Hashanah and Pesach. And I wrote an article in the newsletter. This was the letterhead. So the article is entitled Falling Through the Cracks. And I'm going to take the liberty of reading it to you because I worked very hard to find the right words to express precisely the thought that I had in mind. So I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to share with you the story. The article will serve as the context for the story that I'm going to tell you. Falling through the cracks. We all know the expression. We try our hardest and we make our best efforts, but in spite of it all, some things just fall through the cracks. It happens in shuls as well. It may be a guest, a parent visiting from Israel, a new family, or even a quiet member who has been in the shul for years, but he is overlooked. No one says hello, and he or she falls through the cracks. When it occurs, there is intense pain. What can be more hurtful than isolation? The worst form of incarceration is solitary confinement. People who are not greeted are deeply wounded. As a rabbi, I have received more calls about this issue than almost any other area of concern. Our shuls are generally very friendly. Our members are really exceptionally warm. But once in a while, someone is left out and they end up falling through the cracks. I wrote this 17 years ago, but it's still true. I constantly have people come to me and they say they feel left out because nobody says hello. I know why it happens. We all rely on the other fellow to welcome the guests. That's a big problem because when everybody relies on somebody else, no one is left to say hello. If we would all resolve to be the other fellow, I'll be the other fellow, people would stop falling through the cracks. Here's what we must do. When someone new arrives, each of us must take responsibility to be the one to welcome this new person. How are you? What is your name? I am so-and-so. Can I be helpful? It's nice to meet you. Enjoy your stay. After all, we don't want even one single person to fall through the cracks. And when we say good Shabbos after davening, don't shake hands. This was written at a time when we were still able to shake hands. Don't shake hands. Now don't do the elbow thing. Don't shake hands with your friend nearby. They'll be okay even if they don't receive your blessing. Look for the person who you never spoke to before in shul, even though you've been together in the same room for 25 years. Your good Shabbos will be more meaningful because it may save someone from falling through the cracks. Pesach is a great time to think about this problem. The halacha requires bedikas chametz, the search for chametz, should extend to chorim v'sadokim. Chorim v'sadokim means the cracks and the crevices. Why do you have to check cracks and crevices for chametz? Because you never know what small particles of chametz may have fallen through the cracks. There's a powerful symbolism contained herein. Chametz represents the good intentions that run afoul, the great plans that have spoiled and turned sour. That's why we must search the chorim and sadokim to make sure that our noble and positive aspirations have not fallen through the cracks. Now here's the essence of it all. Crumbs have no feelings, while human beings have frail hearts and tender souls, and are easily offended and hurt. We spend weeks preparing our homes for Pesach, scouring and cleaning in a frenzy, searching for the insidious chametz just to make sure that not one single crumb has fallen through the cracks. If only we would make the same superhuman effort to ensure that every human being is greeted properly and given the respect that they deserve as a Tzelem Elohim, one who was created in the image of God, that each individual so richly deserves. What a difference that would make. This year, as we search with our candle, I wrote this before Pesach, it's true after Pesach too. This year, as we search for our chametz with our candle, and we look through the nooks and crannies of our homes, let's do soul searching as well and resolve to no longer allow anyone to fall through the cracks. That's the article that I wrote. Now here, let me share with you, using this article as an introduction, let me share with you a beautiful story. There was a woman living in the Upper West Side in Manhattan who lost her husband, and Pesach was going to be the first Yontif that she was going to be alone without her husband. And because of the pandemic, she was in isolation. There was none of her family members were able to come to be at the Seder with her. I'm sure you remember from last year, there were so many people that had to perform their own Seder by themselves. And here, she was a recently become a widow, and she was going to have to observe the Seder for herself. It's very painful, particularly the first Yontif without a spouse is perhaps the most difficult. I remember when I was 8 years old, my grandmother passed away, and I was at my grandfather's house. He lived in the Borough Park. I was there with my parents for the Shiva. And then when it came Shabbos, I was sitting next to my Zaidi, and he started to recite Kiddush. As soon as he started, he broke down in tears, and he cried for 5 minutes before he was able to recompose himself, and with enormous difficulty finished the Kiddush. And after the Kiddush, my Zaidi said to me, Yankee, he said, do you know why I was crying so much? I said, no. He said, because this is the first Shabbos in 50 years that your Bobby is not standing next to me while I recite Kiddush. And that's how it is for an Oval, very hard. The first Yontif, and in fact, all the Yom Tovim are the same way, but in particular the first Yontif, when the Oval is reminded of, the mourner is reminded of the absence of their spouse, it's enormously difficult. So here was a woman who was recently become a widow. Pesach was going to be the first Yontif, and she was not able to, she wouldn't even be able to be together with her children. Not only was she bereft of her husband, but she was alone, and she lived in an apartment house. She was going to be alone for the Seder. So right before Pesach, there was a couple that lived across the hall, a family lived across the hall, and they called her on the phone, and they said, we know that you're not able to be with your children for Pesach. Why don't we do the following? We'll leave our door open to the hallway, and you leave your door open, and we'll move our table from the center of the dining room. We'll move it all the way up to the door, and you could sit at the door of your house. You'll be socially distanced, but you'll be able to hear our Seder. And this way, you don't have to perform the whole Seder by yourself. You could be part of our family. And the women gladly accepted the invitation, and that's in fact what they did. They sat opposite each other on the two sides of the hallway, and they made the Seder in that manner. After Yontif, the woman called up one of her children. She says, it was such a beautiful Seder, and you won't believe it. This family has all the same minhagim that we have, down to the T. And not only that, but they sing the exact same nigunim as Tati used to sing. Could you believe it? And it felt so special for me to be able to hear the same nigunim and to see the same minhagim that Tati practiced throughout his lifetime. So that's half of the story. And Paul Harvey, who was used to speak on the radio, and he used to say, and now you know the rest of the story. Well, let me tell you the rest of the story. The rest of the story is that it wasn't just by coincidence that this family happened to have the same minhagim. A few days before Yontif, they called up one of the children of this woman, of this widow, and they said, please tell us all the minhagim. We're going to invite your mother to be opposite us for the Seder. Tell us all the minhagim that you practice, and instead of following our minhagim, we're going to follow your minhagim, so that she should feel comfortable and feel at home. And furthermore, please make a tape and record. I don't know if you use tapes anymore, you could record on a cell phone, but please record all the nigunim that you would sing at the Seder. And we'll learn those nigunim, and we'll make sure to sing those nigunim at the Seder. And that's why it was not by accident. It was by design that the woman felt so much at home, because the minhagim were the same, and even the nigunim were the same as they conducted the Seder. When I heard that story, what did I think? Mi ka'amcha Yisrael. It's a pasuk that's often quoted. Who was like the Jewish people in a time when there's so much animosity and hatred and volatility and fighting and arguments and machlokas in our society? We look at the tremendous sensitivity of a Jewish family, that they understood the feelings of an almana, what it was like for her to experience her first Pesach, and because of COVID, she would have to experience it alone, and they wanted her to be as comfortable as possible, and they went out of their ways. They forgoed all their own minhagim and their own nigunim, and they did it her way, so that she should feel a little bit of a connection to her late departed husband. And this is a terrific example of making sure that somebody doesn't fall through the cracks. Although when I wrote the article, I specifically discussed falling through the cracks in terms of people saying hello in shul, but falling through the cracks goes far beyond that. It's in so many different ways people fall through the cracks, and in particular, during the last year, many people, especially older people, have been in isolation, and I've spoken to some of these people, and they say nobody calls us, nobody says hello, and we're all alone, and I can't fault anybody, and I myself really partially to blame. I don't call people often enough because I'm so busy, but what ends up happening is that these people fall through the cracks, and it requires, in order not to have that happen, it requires some thoughtfulness. That I thought that it was so, it was the sensitivity and the brilliance, this genius idea of replicating the Seder by changing all their nigunim and their minhagim to do it exactly the way she did it. It was really so special that this family thought of performing the Seder in that manner. And that's how they prevented this woman falling through the cracks. And we have countless situations in life where, if we would be thoughtful, if we would think about how the other person feels, if we put ourselves in the other person's shoes, we wouldn't behave the same way that we do. And we would be successful in helping others not fall through the cracks. So, to reiterate the point that I made in my article, Pesach, we're worried about the cracks, the nooks and crannies in our houses. There's a little tiny crack and fissure in the floor someplace, and we get down on our hands and knees, and we take the vacuum cleaner, and we take a hanger, and we try to catch the piece of chametz and the little speck there, and we're vacuuming and scrubbing to get rid of all the chametz that might have fallen into the nooks and crannies of the floor. Well, there are people that fall into nooks and crannies, not little pieces of chametz, but people who fall into the nooks and crannies, and they're just lost, they're abandoned. So let's make a tremendous effort not to let that happen. Not even though we've already finished B'dikas Chametz, but it's a lesson for the whole year. Let's be thoughtful about other people. Let's think about what their needs are, and in that way, hopefully, we'll be able to prevent human beings from falling through the cracks. I wish everyone, together with Fegi, we wish everyone a very beautiful and wonderful Chag Kosher B'Sameach.